Imagine for a second discovering the absolute perfect childhood book.
Right.
Like the exact one that finally makes you feel seen. The one that somehow, I don't know, magically articulates the very specific and maybe very isolated chaos of your young life.
Which is a profound feeling for a kid.
Oh, absolutely. You find this incredibly comforting, deeply validating story. But, and here's the catch, you don't actually find it until you are 30 years old.
Wow. Yeah, that creates a really fascinating psychological dissonance, doesn't it?
So,
Because you are simultaneously grieving the fact that you didn't have this tool when you needed it most, while you're also trying to apply its lessons retrospectively to a childhood that has, already passed.
exactly. And that is exactly the driving force of our mission today on this deep dive.
Right.
We are looking at a truly massive stack of sources today. It's essentially the meticulously documented personal reading log of a 30-year-old reader.
And it is extensive.
Oh, it's intimidating. Between the years 2025 and 2026, this person consumed 50 highly diverse books. Like, this was their deliberate return to reading after years of just procrastinating on it.
Yeah, we've all been there with the reading slumps.
Right. But the list they tackled is wild. We were talking hard science fiction, dense treatises on Bronze Age civilizational collapse.
Which is heavy reading.
Super heavy. Medieval history, feminist mythology, and, even complex explorations of the existential threat of artificial intelligence.
It's a remarkable syllabus. I mean, it's a deeply intense program of self-education.
Yeah.
But the anchor here, the real narrative spine that gives all of this heavy adult literature its context, is the fact that this reader was consuming all of it right alongside their first ever reading of a 13-book children's series.
Right, which is a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket.
That's the one. And, I want to establish right out of the gate that our deep dive today isn't going to be just some whimsical recap of a children's book plot.
Right, no, we're going way deeper.
Exactly. We are looking at the cognitive scaffolding that this reader is building. We're going to examine how reading this dense, sometimes bleak adult literature, alongside a deeply cynical Gothic children's story, became a mechanism for this specific reader.
A mechanism to process things.
Yes, specifically to process a highly sheltered religious upbringing. It's essentially a literal roadmap for confronting the incompetence of the adults who raised them, unpacking systemic failures, and ultimately forging their own agency.
It's almost as if they built a time machine out of paperbacks to go back and rescue their inner child.
That's a great way to put it.
Thanks. And I want you, the listener, to really keep us in the back of your mind as we go through this. Think about the media you were handed as a kid.
Right, the stuff your parents or teachers gave you.
Yeah. Did the stories you grew up with actually prepare you for the complexities, the unfairness, and just the sheer absurdity of the real world? Or were they just, shielding you with false promises?
Usually it's the latter.
Yeah, usually. So, okay, let's unpack this.
To really understand this journey, I think we have to start at the very foundation of how a child views the world.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Well, before you can construct your own identity, you have to undergo this painful realization that the adults and the systems in charge of you are deeply, perhaps fundamentally flawed.
Right.
You have to, pierce the illusion of authority.
Which brings us directly to the first 3 books of the Snicket series, right? The Bad Beginning, The Reptile Room, and The Wide Window.
Exactly.
So for anyone who hasn't read them, they follow the Baudelaire orphans. That's Violet, Klaus, and Sunny. And they lose their parents in this highly suspicious fire.
Right, their whole life goes up in smoke.
Literally.
Yeah.
And then they are continually placed in the care of increasingly bizarre and just useless guardians, all while being actively hunted by the villain, Count Olaf.
Who is after their massive fortune.
Yes. Now, the reader makes a really striking admission in their notes right at the start of this log. They say that if they had read this as an actual child, they would have been absolutely terrified.
And it's crucial to understand why they would have been terrified,
Right, because it's not traditional horror.
No, it isn't because of monsters under the bed or ghosts in the attic. The horror of Lemony Snicket is the terrifying reality that the adults who are supposed to protect you might actually exploit you. Or, even worse, they might just completely ignore you.
Yes. Oh, the reader points out this incredible tonal clash in the books. You have this narrator, Lemony Snicket, who uses this highly stylized, whimsical voice.
Very detached and dry.
Yeah, and he literally stops the story to give the reader vocabulary lessons, but that whimsy is just constantly colliding with incredibly dark, grounded themes of real neglect.
Jarring.
It is. Look at the specific examples the reader logged. In the second book, The Reptile Room, they're placed with Dr. Montgomery.
Uncle Monty.
Right. And that there's this palpable, suffocating tension when Count Olaf shows up in disguise as his assistant. And at one point, Olaf drops the whimsical facade entirely. He just looks at the children, completely deadpan, and coldly says, "Get in the damn car."
It's a chilling moment because it's a moment where the veil of childhood innocence isn't just lifted, it's violently punctured.
Yeah. Damn is a strong word for a kid's book.
It is. And the author's using it to signal to the young reader that the danger is real, and the adults in the room, like Uncle Monty, are completely blind to it.
And honestly, it gets even more frustrating in the third book, The Wide Window.
Oh, and Josephine.
Yes, Aunt Josephine.
Mm.
The children are sent to live with her, and on paper, she is a functioning adult. She has a house, she's a guardian.
But in reality,
Her agoraphobic lifestyle makes her house a total prison. She has this eccentric, mundane obsession with proper grammar, but an utterly paralyzing, irrational fear of things like stoves.
and realtors.
Yes, realtors and doorknobs, because they might shatter into a million pieces and get in your eye. She's completely trapped in a limbo of her own making.
Which means she's entirely unavailable to actually protect the children.
Exactly. Count Olaf is standing right in front of her, physically threatening the orphans, and she completely ignores the actual lethal threat because she's too busy correcting someone's sentence structure.
It's maddening.
It's like having a tour guide in a burning building who insists on stopping to explain the Latin etymology of the word combustion while the ceiling is literally collapsing on top of you.
That's a perfect analogy.
You are actively trying to survive, and the person in charge is obsessing over syntax.
That analogy perfectly captures the systemic paralysis the reader is identifying here. And this is exactly where the parallel adult reading list starts to provide some incredible connective tissue.
Oh, bring it in. What were they reading?
Well, in the exact same month, this reader is absorbing Aunt Josephine's absurd fears. They are also reading Franz Kafka's The Trial.
Oh, wow. Talk about the ultimate study in absurdity. For a quick refresher for the listener, The Trial follows Joseph K., a man who is arrested and prosecuted by this remote, completely inaccessible authority. And the wildest part is, the nature of his crime is never revealed to him or to the reader.
Right. And what our reader is tracking here is the absurd nature of how characters in Kafka's world react to the central problem.
How so?
Joseph K. is facing a deeply corrupt, completely incomprehensible legal system. And just like Aunt Josephine or Mr. Poe.
Oh, Mr. Poe,
Yeah.
the hopelessly inept banker in the Snicket books.
Right, the guy in charge of the orphan's estate. Just like him, the adults in the trial offer these bizarre, circular, entirely unhelpful parables instead of actual assistance.
They both perfectly capture this incredibly bleak hopelessness, like the feeling of being completely at the mercy of a system that is either actively corrupt or just catastrophically inept.
It's exhausting just reading about it.
Right. It's the horror of standing in front of an adult, pointing at a literal villain holding a knife, and the adult says, "Well, let's make sure we filled out the proper forms in triplicate before we address the murderer."
It's a profound violation of the social contract between generations. I mean, it's a total failure of empathy.
Absolutely.
And the reader pulls another classic text into this exact same conceptual space. They bring in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Oh, that's interesting, because I feel like most people think of Frankenstein purely as a monster story, right? Like a horror novel about the dangers of playing God.
They do, yeah. But the reader views it through the lens of guardianship.
Oh.
What stood out in the reading log wasn't the physical horror of the creature, but the utter, immediate failure of the creator.
Okay, break that down.
Victor Frankenstein spends years obsessively building this being, but the very second the creature opens its eyes and is animated, Frankenstein's passion just vanishes.
He runs away,
He is repulsed and he abandons it entirely.
which creates a being that is highly intelligent and, as the book actually shows, deeply capable of empathy. But he receives absolutely none from the world,
Right.
which is what ultimately turns the creature vengeful in the end.
Precisely. The creature is functionally an orphan, and this parallels the profound abandonment the Baudelaire children face.
They're essentially the same.
Yeah, Violet, Klaus, and Sunny are highly intelligent, deeply empathetic children thrown into a world of adults who simply refuse to engage with them as human beings worthy of care.
You know, I'm struggling with something here, though.
What's that?
If the reader explicitly states in their log that reading Lemony Snicket as a child would have terrified them, Why do they view this as such a positive therapeutic experience now?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Like, is exposing children to the darkness of Kafkaesque adult incompetence actually beneficial for a developing mind? Or is this just a 30-year-old finding catharsis in hindsight?
That is the core psychological question of this whole deep dive. And the developmental psychology implicit in this reader's journey suggests that it actually is profoundly beneficial.
Really? Why?
Because children already know when adults are failing them.
Oh, they definitely do.
They have an innate sense for hypocrisy and neglect. The damage often comes when the media they consume or the other adults in their lives try to gaslight them into believing the system is actually working perfectly.
Wow. So the whimsy of traditional children's literature is almost a form of gaslighting. Like,
Yeah.
everything is fine, the adults have it under control, go to sleep.
Exactly. What Lemony Snicket does, and what this specific reader desperately needed, is validation.
Validation of their reality.
Yes. The author acknowledges the darkness while simultaneously respecting the child's intelligence. By giving them advanced vocabulary and framing the horror with this dark, wry humor, the narrative tells the child, you aren't crazy. You aren't imagining things.
The adults really are this incompetent.
And the system actually is broken.
That makes total sense. And it actually reminds me of the reader's notes on Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness.
That was a phenomenal connection they made. How did they bridge Conrad to Lemony Snicket?
Well, so Heart of Darkness is famously about a journey up the Congo River, right?
Yeah.
And it's basically peeling back the layers of European imperialism to reveal the sheer brutality underneath it all.
Right.
The reader notes this subversive realization in the text that the concepts of civilization and savagery are not actually opposites. They aren't nearly as far apart as high society pretends they are.
Right. The veneer of polite society is incredibly thin.
Exactly. So in the Snicket universe, Mr. Poe, the banker, represents civilization.
He's an institution.
Yeah, he has a suit, he works at a big bank, he's constantly coughing into a white handkerchief. But his bureaucratic apathy, his absolute refusal to look closely at what the orphans are suffering, is really just a different flavor of the savagery of Count Olaf.
They yield the same result.
Right. Olaf wants to steal their fortune through active violence, but Mr. Poe is perfectly willing to let them die through administrative neglect. To a child, the outcome is exactly the same.
Which is a chilling transition into the next phase of this reader's journey.
Let's go there.
Because if you establish that individual adults are unreliable, the next logical question a developing mind asks is, well, what about the institutions? What about the safety nets?
Right. The police, the schools, the government.
And what the reader discovers is that the safety nets are also collapsing.
We are moving from the failure of individual guardians to the terrifying realization that entire societal systems, capitalism, technology, the educational infrastructure can utterly rot away.
And this is where the reading syllabus takes a distinctly macro-level turn.
Yeah, let's look at books 4 through 6 of the Snicket series.
Yeah.
That's The Miserable Mill, The Austere Academy, and The Eurosats Elevator.
The narrative scope dramatically widens here, doesn't it?
It really does. It's no longer just a bad foster parent in a weird, isolated house.
Yeah.
In The Miserable Mill, the children are forced into literal child labor at a lumber mill.
Right.
They are fed one meal a day, and they're paid in chewing gum and coupons.
It is a rather blunt but highly effective exploration of exploitative capitalism for a young audience.
Absolutely. And the reader zeroes in on the two men running the mill, Sir and Charles. Sir is the ruthless capitalist, totally dispassionate about the suffering of the workers. His face is literally obscured by a cloud of cigar smoke the whole time.
A literal smokescreen.
Right. But Charles is the fascinating one. He is nice to the orphans. He clearly feels bad for them, but he does absolutely nothing to stop Sir.
Because he benefits from the system, too.
Exactly. The reader identifies Charles as the embodiment of incompetent compassion.
Which is a devastating critique of passive allyship. Feeling bad for someone doesn't save them from the machinery of the mill.
It really doesn't. And then in the Austere Academy, the orphans are sent to Prufrock Preparatory School, which is this horrifying boarding school run by a deeply insecure, tyrannical principal named Vice Principal Nero.
Who plays a violin terribly.
Terribly. And it's staffed by obsessive, uncaring teachers. It's a complete institutional failure. But here's the detail that the reader absolutely loved.
What was it?
The school actually has a highly advanced computer system.
Ah, technology as a supposed savior.
Right. The computer is explicitly programmed to detect Count Olaf and keep him out of the school. But it completely spectacularly fails.
Of course it does.
The reader views this as a brilliant commentary on the limits of technology. We like to think that coding or algorithms can solve human corruption, right? But a system is only as competent as the humans operating it. If the humans are flawed, the tech is flawed.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. And finally, they end up in the ersatz elevator.
Which might be the bleakest of all of them, honestly.
It really is. They are placed in an impossibly high, luxurious penthouse skyscraper with exceedingly wealthy guardians, Jerome and Esme Squalor. And this book is a masterclass in highlighting bourgeois apathy.
Esme is just terrifying.
She is. Because the adults in this penthouse are solely obsessed with what is in and what is out, basically what is trendy. They care about wearing dark suits and drinking parsley soda.
Parsley soda. Just vile.
Vile.
Yeah.
But they are completely indifferent to the actual visceral suffering of the children living in their home, or the fact that Olaf is hiding the Quagmire triplets in an empty elevator shaft in their building.
When you look at how the reader contextualizes this specific trio of books with their adult reading list, you see a really deep dive into the mechanics of civilizational collapse.
What were they reading alongside this?
During this exact same time frame, they are reading Eric H. Klein's 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed,
Oh, wow.
alongside Susan Weisbauer's History of the Ancient World.
I have to say, pairing Lemony Snicket with a forensic analysis of the late Bronze Age collapse is just... it's chef's kiss. It's an incredibly unique way to process information.
It is deeply analytical. Klein's book argues that the collapse of the Mediterranean civilization, so the Mycenaeans, the Minoans, the Hittites, it wasn't caused by just one thing.
Right, it wasn't just a single event.
No, it wasn't just a drought or just an earthquake or just invading armies. It was a perfect storm of interconnected failures. The thesis is that highly interdependent, complex societies become incredibly vulnerable. If one pillar falls, it triggers a cascade that brings down the entire structure.
And the reader maps that directly onto the Baudelaires.
Yes. What the orphans are living through is essentially a micro-version of a Bronze Age collapse. Their foundational pillars are all failing simultaneously.
Let's trace that.
Well, the banking system that holds their fortune is inept. The housing system places them in danger. Their educational institutions actively traumatize them. The technological safeguards fail. The entire interdependent web of the adult society around them is completely disintegrating.
They are basically surviving the fall of the Roman Empire, except the empire is just the adult world of their city.
Precisely.
But I wonder, how does a person, whether it's a citizen of a falling empire or just a kid in a broken home, actually react when that protective sheath breaks?
To answer that, the reader turns to Eric Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front.
Ah, the seminal, unapologetic depiction of the absolute depravity and disillusionment of the trenches in World War I.
Right. And what the reader pulls from Remarque isn't just the anti-war sentiment, which is obvious. They identify the core behavioral shifts that occur when the system collapses.
What kind of shifts?
They note the raw, stripped-down survival instinct of man. They note the intense, vital camaraderie that forms among the soldiers in the trenches. And, crucially, they note the profound, unbridgeable disconnection between the soldiers fighting for their lives and the apathetic, nationalistic civilian population back home.
Oh, I see the connection now. When the Baudelaires are at the academy, they meet the Quagmire triplets, who have also lost their parents in a fire and are also being hunted.
Right.
The orphans and the Quagmires form this intense, almost military-like camaraderie. They are essentially soldiers in the trenches together, because they are the only ones who understand the actual stakes of the war they are fighting.
Precisely. They have a shared trauma that bonds them in a way the adults simply cannot penetrate.
And the wealthy residents of the penthouse and the ersatz elevator, the ones drinking parsley soda and obsessing over what's trendy, they are the apathetic civilian population.
Exactly.
They have absolutely no idea what it's like on the front lines, and they don't want to know. It ruins the vibe.
The wealthy guardians are entirely insulated from the war of survival. The reader is meticulously tracking how humanity fractures when the social contract is dissolved.
This also bleeds perfectly into the dystopian fiction on their list. They read Yevgeny Zamyatin's We and Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower during this chunk.
Both incredible works.
Oh, yeah. Now, Parable of the Sower is incredibly poignant here. The protagonist, Lauren Olamina, grows up in a walled, sheltered, somewhat religious community in a near-future California that is basically falling apart due to climate change and economic collapse.
A literal walled garden.
Yes. But when the walls are finally breached and the community is destroyed by scavengers, Lauren doesn't just sit in the ashes waiting for the government to arrive with a relief truck.
No, she knows they aren't coming.
Right, she knows the government is useless. She is forced to migrate north on foot. And to survive, she literally has to invent an entirely new philosophy, a new religion called Earthseed, because the old systems of protection and meaning have completely rotted away.
It's a remarkable parallel to the emotional work the reader is attempting, and Zamyatin's We offers a similar yet inverse reflection.
To get the context on we.
For context, We is a dystopian novel that actually predates and heavily influenced George Orwell's 1984.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it depicts a society that uses a distorted hyper-mathematical rationalism to completely erase individual identity, all for the sake of absolute safety and conformity.
Right, everyone is just a number, not a name.
Exactly. The protagonist is D503, but when he falls in love, he experiences passion and irrationality for the very first time. And the protective mathematical sheath of his society fractures.
Wow.
So across all these diverse texts, whether it's the historical collapse of the Bronze Age, the trenches of WWI, the dystopian futures of Butler and Zamyatin, or the whimsical misery of Lemony Snicket, the reader is observing the terrifying void that opens up when societal structures evaporate.
Okay, so let's pause and consolidate where this reader's head is at right now.
Good idea.
The individual adults are hopelessly corrupt or useless. The macro systems, capitalism, technology institutions have entirely collapsed. If you are a 30-year-old trying to rebuild your worldview from the ground up, you might think the answer to all this chaos is simple: truth.
Right.
Exposing the corruption, finding the empirical facts, and shining a massive light on them.
A very Enlightenment-era assumption. If only people knew the truth, they would act reasonably.
Right. But what happens when you bring the truth to a society that doesn't actually want to hear it?
That is the dangerous part.
That brings us to the next phase of our reader's journey, which explores what happens when a society actively declares war on knowledge.
This is where the realization hits that truth is not merely ignored by the incompetent. It is actively, violently hunted by the frightened.
Let's track this through books 7, 8, and 9 of the Snicket series. That's The Vile Village, The Hostile Hospital, and The Carnivorous Carnival.
Things get really dark here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. At this point in the narrative, the safety net isn't just gone. It has been inverted and weaponized against the children. The Baudelaires are framed for a crime and are officially labeled as murderers.
They are hunted by the police.
Yes. Even Mr. Poe, that final, useless vestige of the old banking system, completely abandons them. They're totally on their own.
They transition from being neglected dependents to being active outcasts.
And the society they encounter is terrifying. In the Vile Village, they're subjected to literal mob mentality. The village is run by the Council of Elders, who enforce thousands of arbitrary, contradictory rules, and the entire town is basically a cult of foul devotees who literally worship crows.
It's madness.
It is. And when the orphans try to point out the truth about Count Olaf, the mob literally tries to burn them at the stake.
The mob prioritizes its dogma over empirical reality.
Yes, and I have to bring up this incredibly specific, brilliant observation the reader made regarding the next book, The Hostile Hospital.
What did they notice?
The orphans are hiding in a hospital, and they encounter this group called the Volunteers for Fighting Disease. And their entire mandated method of helping the sick patients is to walk the halls with heart-shaped balloons, singing completely useless, cheerful songs.
It is a rather bleak, biting satire of performative charity.
It really is.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you from a psychological standpoint, why does this specific satire of unhelpful charity, this kind of aggressive faith-healing vibe, resonate so deeply with a reader who is actively unpacking a sheltered religious upbringing?
It resonates powerfully because it exposes the performative nature of certain institutional responses to genuine suffering.
Say more about that.
Well, for someone raised in a strictly dogmatic or highly religious environment, they likely witnessed or were directly subjected to instances where prayer or song or strict adherence to a ritual was offered as a substitute for tangible empirical help.
Right, like saying, I will pray for you, instead of actually paying your medical bill or taking you to a doctor.
Yeah, exactly. The reader recognizes the insidious danger of organizations that prioritize their own rituals or their own feelings of moral superiority over actually alleviating the suffering of the vulnerable.
Wow.
Think about it. The volunteers for fighting disease feel fantastic about themselves because they sang the song. They feel they have done their duty. Meanwhile, the patient is still actively dying in the bed.
God, that's heavy.
It's a critique of how institutions use the aesthetics of goodness to mask their absolute failure to provide care.
That is deeply unsettling, but incredibly accurate. And you see the consequences of this mindset immediately in the books. Because what happens to the people who try to find the actual medical files, the real data?
This is a recurring, deeply symbolic motif in these specific books. The reader notes that everywhere the orphans go to find concrete answers, the locations are destroyed by fire.
Literally burned to the ground.
Yes. In the hostel hospital, it's the Hall of Records, the literal repository of medical and historical truth. It burns down. In the Carnivorous Carnival, they go to Madame Lulu's fortune-telling tent, which is secretly a hub of intelligence and hidden documents. It also burns down.
It is a literal physical war on knowledge. And the reader is heavily, heavily layering this fictional destruction of libraries with their nonfiction historical deep dives.
What were they pairing this with?
During this phase, they read Stephen Greenblatt's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Swerve, How the World Became Modern, alongside the actual ancient text it focuses on, Lucretius's De Rerum Naturae, on the nature of things.
That is a staggering intellectual pairing. To really understand why the reader connects this to the Burning Hall of Records, we need to briefly explain Lucretius.
Please do.
He was a 1st century BCE Roman poet and philosopher. De Rerum Natura is essentially a massive poem outlining Epicurean philosophy and early atomism.
Right. Break down atomism for us in this specific context.
Atomism is the radical, ancient idea that the entire universe is composed of tiny, indivisible particles, atoms, moving through a void. Lucretius suggested that all natural phenomena stem from the random collision and fluctuation of these atoms.
Meaning, no gods required.
Precisely. He argued that the natural world is self-sufficient. Lightning isn't Zeus being angry, it's atmospheric pressure and friction. Disease isn't a divine punishment, it's biological.
He was way ahead of his time.
He was. He strongly advocated for human reason, empirical evidence, and freeing the mind from the terror of religious superstition.
Which is an incredibly dangerous idea if you are, say, a medieval religious institution whose entire power structure relies on people believing that you hold the keys to divine intervention.
Exactly, and that is what Greenblatt's The Swerve details. It chronicles how these empirical, essentially proto-atheistic or deeply humanist ideas were ruthlessly suppressed and nearly erased from history by medieval institutions.
They tried to burn the metaphorical Hall of Records.
They did. The knowledge wasn't just forgotten, it was actively buried because it fundamentally threatened the authority of the prevailing systems.
And the reader didn't stop there. They went further down the historical rabbit hole of suppressed science. They read Carl Sagan's Cosmos and Davis Sobel's Galileo's Daughter.
Excellent choices.
Yeah, and they noted this intense, almost grieving surprise that even in ancient Greece, which we so often idolize as this pristine birthplace of logic and democracy, there were cult-like philosophers, like the Pythagoreans, who actively stamped out intellectual debate when it threatened their mystical mathematical beliefs.
The suppression of truth is definitely not a modern invention.
And then there's Galileo. Sobel's book beautifully, tragically details how Galileo, a man who essentially laid the foundation for modern empirical science by mapping the stars and proving the Earth revolves around the sun, was condemned to house arrest by the Roman Inquisition.
Yes!
His crime was looking through a telescope and reporting what was actually there.
Because the empirical data contradicted the accepted dogma of the Church. The institution demanded that the universe conform to their texts rather than adjusting their texts to fit the universe.
Just like the Baudelaires, they are hunted by the police, the Council of Elders, and the mob for seeking empirical proof of Count Olaf's crimes. The system doesn't want the truth.
No, it doesn't.
The truth requires the system to change, to admit fault, to do actual work. The system just wants compliance.
Which forces the keepers of truth into hiding. We see this theme of preservation in the dark echoed powerfully in the historical fiction the reader chose to accompany this phase.
Oh, yeah. They read Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose and Christopher Buehlman's Between Two Fires.
Eco's book is phenomenal, a dense, brilliant murder mystery set in a 14th century Italian monastery.
Indeed. And the reader focuses on Eco's depiction of the monastery's labyrinthine library. The abbey explicitly hides knowledge. The most philosophical, controversial texts are locked away in a section of the library that is completely cut off from open access. The monks are strictly forbidden to read them.
Which creates this incredibly toxic atmosphere.
Exactly.
It creates an atmosphere of unquestioning veneration mixed with intense, lethal paranoia. And the reader notes that when the hidden truths inevitably start bleeding out, It leads to a profound, violent disillusionment with authority.
The reader also mentions Noah Gordon's The Physician. This is a fascinating pull.
I'm not as familiar with that one.
So it's about an 11th century English boy who possesses a raw talent for healing. But the medical knowledge in Christian Europe at the time is abysmal. It's mostly just barbers and bloodletting. To actually access real medical knowledge, he has to travel across the known world to Persia to study under the great polymath Avicenna.
But to do so, he must covertly assimilate, right?
Right? As a Christian, he wouldn't be allowed into the academy there. So he has to disguise himself as a Jew, adopting religious rituals and cultural markers that aren't his own, just to learn how to heal people. He has to completely submerge his identity to access empirical truth.
Which is an astonishingly direct parallel to the Baudelaire orphans at this stage of their journey.
How so?
Well, in the carnivorous carnival, they are forced to don literal physical disguises, pretending to be freaks in the carnival just to survive long enough to gather intelligence on Count Olaf. They have to play along with the absurd cruelty of the society just to access the hidden documents in Madame Lulu's tent.
That's a perfect connection. I think it's important to pause here and look at the sheer scope of what this reader is processing.
It is essential.
Mm.
And as an analytical caveat, we must note the deeply neutral, overarching pattern the reader is tracking.
Right.
The reader is not targeting a specific modern political party or a single religious denomination. They are identifying a universal human reflex. Whether it is the Catholic Inquisition suppressing Galileo, the Nazi regime burning Erich Maria Remarque's anti-war books, the fictional monks in Eco's Abbey hiding Greek philosophy, or the fictional VFD organization burning the Hall of Records.
The reader is recognizing the exact same mechanism at play. The fight to preserve truth against authoritarian control. It spans centuries, it spans ideologies, and it spans genres.
Exactly. The realization is that the burning of the library isn't a bug in the system. For an authoritarian system, it is the primary feature.
Think about that in your own life for a second. Have you ever been in a corporate environment or a community organization where pointing out a glaring flaw, like pointing out the literal numbers on a spreadsheet, made you the enemy?
I think we all have.
Right, where preserving the narrative was more important than actually fixing the problem. That is the micro version of the Hall of Records burning down.
It is.
So this brings us to a terrifying crossroads for our reader. The adults are corrupt, the systemic safety nets have collapsed, and society is actively burning the libraries and hunting the people who speak the truth. What is left?
It's a bleak picture.
How do you actually survive when the world is this deeply, fundamentally hostile?
Well, when you can no longer trust the community and you can no longer trust the historical record, you are forced into radical self-reliance. You must rely solely on the laws of physics and biology.
Which brings us to Section 4, Engineering Survival. The reader suddenly pivots to the application of hard science. We are looking at books 10, 11, and 12 of the Snicket series, The Slippery Slope, The Grim Grotto, and The Penultimate Peril.
The stakes get incredibly high here.
They do. And the reader points out some of their absolute favorite, most validating moments in the entire series here. Let's start with The Slippery Slope.
Okay.
The orphans have been separated. The youngest Baudelaire, Sonny, who is essentially a toddler at this point, has been kidnapped by Count Olaf and forced to survive on the freezing, jagged peak of the Mortmain Mountains.
A scenario of absolute chilling isolation.
But Sonny doesn't just cry and wait for rescue. She uses her intellect. She utilizes her developing culinary skills and pure survival instincts to essentially outsmart a mountain and a team of villains. She engineers her own survival using the meager physical resources around her.
It is a moment of profound, isolated agency for the youngest, most vulnerable character.
And there's this deeply touching, quiet moment the reader highlights regarding the older siblings, Violet and Klaus, who are climbing the mountain with a new ally, Quigley Quagmire.
What happened?
Violet and Quigley are sharing a tender, emotional moment on this frozen cliff face. And the narrator, Lemony Snicket, explicitly steps in and states that he is going to stop describing the scene.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He tells the reader that he is intentionally omitting the details of their conversation to give the two teenagers privacy.
That is a remarkable authorial choice.
Isn't it? The reader writes in their log that, having grown up in an environment where they lacked privacy, where boundaries were perhaps routinely violated or ignored in the name of authority, they know their younger self would have felt immense, overwhelming validation reading this. An adult narrator actively respectfully choosing to grant children boundaries.
That is the therapeutic power of narrative in action. The authorial voice is providing the respect and autonomy that the reader's real world withheld from them. The book literally becomes the surrogate healthy parent.
It's beautiful. From there, the aesthetic and the stakes shift dramatically in the Grim Grotto.
That's the underwater one, right?
Yeah, the orphans are trapped in a steampunk-style submarine at the bottom of the ocean. They are introduced to a terrifying, highly lethal biological threat, a fungal infection called the medusoid mycelium, which can kill within an hour of exposure.
And this claustrophobic, high-stakes environment forces a critical moment of maturation.
Yes, the orphans manage to escape the submarine and wash up on a beach. And who is waiting for them? Mr. Poe, the banker.
Of course he is.
He tells them to come with him, to go back to the bank, back to the system. But at the exact same moment, a taxi pulls up, driven by a mysterious stranger, Kit Snicket. And the orphans actively, permanently reject Mr. Poe.
They make a choice.
They choose the dangerous unknown of the stranger's taxi over the guaranteed failure of the banker who holds the keys to their massive fortune.
They finally realize that returning to the system is a death sentence, and it is no coincidence that during this exact phase of radical, engineered survival, the reader dives heavily into the hard science fiction of Andy Weir.
Oh, yeah.
They read The Martian and Project Hail Mary.
Oh, this is the perfect pairing. Mark Watney stranded on Mars.
Precisely. The reader notes something profound about how Weir structures his narratives. Weir uses science not merely as a backdrop or a method of academic inquiry, he uses it as an engine that maintains narrative tension. But more importantly, in a life-or-death survival situation, applied science becomes a source of radical optimism.
Yes. Think about it. When you are stranded alone on an irradiated rock millions of miles from Earth, or when you are trapped in a steampunk submarine sinking into an abyssal trench, you cannot pray the water away.
No, you can't.
You cannot sing a cheerful song to fix the broken oxygen scrubber. Empirical reality is your only friend. When Violet Baudelaire invents a graveling hook out of burnt electrical wires and a rubber band, she is doing exactly what Mark Watney is doing when he figures out how to grow potatoes in Martian dirt using hydrazine and his own waste.
Engineering is their coping mechanism. It is the application of human intellect against the indifferent cruelty of the universe.
It is the ultimate antidote to the miasma theory of their world.
Exactly. And that connects beautifully to another piece of nonfiction on their list, Stephen Johnson's The Ghost Map.
Oh, explain the miasma theory for us and how it fits into this puzzle.
So, The Ghost Map is a historical account of the devastating cholera epidemics in Victorian London. At the time, the prevailing, deeply entrenched medical authority believed in the miasma theory, the idea that bad, foul-smelling air from the slums caused illness.
Right.
It was essentially a superstitious, unscientific belief masked as medical consensus, and it allowed the authorities to blame the poor for their own sickness.
But it was completely wrong.
Entirely wrong. But Dr. John Snow and Reverend Henry Whitehead decided to ignore the consensus. They used hard geographic data. They meticulously mapped every single cholera death in a specific neighborhood and traced the outbreak not to the air, but to a single contaminated water pump on Broad Street.
They proved it with data.
They fought against stubborn, incorrect, arrogant authority with undeniable empirical data.
Just like Klaus Baudelaire. When his sister Sunny is infected by the lethal medusoid mycelium fungus, Klaus doesn't panic, and he doesn't wait for Mr. Poe to file a health insurance claim. He gets the books. He researches the biological life cycle of the fungus to find the specific botanical antidote, which turns out to be horseradish, just in time to save her life.
It is the triumph of data over dogma. And the reader is also deeply exploring the biology of the other during this time.
What do you mean by that?
Well, to understand their place in the natural order, they dive into primatology and speculative biology. They read Dian Fossey's Gorillas in the Mist, Michael Crichton's Congo, and Pierre Boulle's Planet of the Apes.
I noticed that cluster of books in the log. There's a real intense fascination with where the boundaries of humanity actually lie.
There is. The reader notes Fossey's real-life sacrifice. She completely removed herself from human society, enduring extreme survival conditions, navigating political corruption and intense isolation in Rwanda to study and protect mountain gorillas. Her commitment to observing reality, which ultimately resulted in her unsolved murder in her remote cabin, mirrors the high-stakes, fatalistic survival the Baudelaires face.
They also brought in Crichton's Congo, which features Amy, a gorilla who has been taught sign language and essentially raised as a human. It completely blurs the lines of cognition and empathy.
It really does.
And Boulley's original Planet of the Apes novel, which is much more philosophical than the movies, it questions whether human cultural advancement stems from pure, unique intellect, or if we are just blindly imitating past generations without actually understanding what we are doing.
The reader also pulls in Creton's Eaters of the Dead, which is a grounded historical take on the Beowulf myth involving surviving Neanderthals, and his collaboration with Bruce Sterling, The Difference Engine.
The Difference Engine is the quintessential steampunk novel.
It is.
It imagines a Victorian era where Charles Babbage actually successfully built his mechanical computer. It features these incredible debates about early paleontology and the concept of extinction.
By blending history, evolutionary biology, and alternative timelines, these authors allow the reader to question the very nature of human progress. If evolution can create dead ends, can human society also be an evolutionary dead end?
But I'm struggling with a major contradiction here.
What is it?
We just established that hard science, pure logic, and empirical data are the ultimate tools for survival. They save Mark Watney, they save Jon Snow's London, and they save Sonny Baudelaire.
Right.
But when we get to the 12th book of the series, The Penultimate Peril, the orphans throw pure logic out the window. They end up in a deeply ambiguous liminal space, this massive hotel, and the lines between good and evil are completely blurred. The orphans even end up committing crimes themselves. They set a fire, the very thing the villain does. Why would the reader celebrate that?
This raises an important question, and it's because it is the agonizing realization that pure logic isn't enough to navigate human society. Science can build a submarine, but it cannot tell you who deserves to be saved. The reader finds the philosophical framework for this in E.O. Wilson's book, Consilience, and Ted Chiang's sci-fi novella Story of Your Life.
Break down consilience for us.
Consilience is the principle that evidence from independent, unrelated sources can jump together to form a unified conclusion. E.O. Wilson, a brilliant biologist, argues that knowledge must be unified across the natural sciences and the humanities.
So blending hard science with philosophy.
Yes. You cannot separate the hard, empirical data of biology from the complex, irrational, messy realities of human behavior, ethics, and sociology.
And Ted Chiang's Story of Your Life, which the movie Arrival was based on, explores how learning a nonlinear alien language literally rewires the protagonist's brain, changing her perception of time and free will. She knows the tragic outcome of her future, but chooses to experience it anyway because of love.
Exactly. The Baudelaires realize that surviving the adult world isn't just about building a better grappling hook out of empirical facts. It requires grappling with deep, agonizing moral ambiguity. Right.
The world isn't a simple binary of good people who read books and bad people who set fires. It's a complex, terrifying web of actions and unintended consequences. In the hotel, they realize that to survive, they must compromise their own moral purity.
Which brings us to the final climax of this incredible 2-year psychological journey. We've escaped the chaotic world, we've rejected the systems, we've engineered our survival. But when you finally isolate yourself from the madness, you find that total isolation presents its own terrifying psychological dangers.
It leads to the ultimate act of maturity, realizing that safety is an illusion and choosing to forge your own unpredictable path.
Let's unpack the final book of the series, appropriately titled The End.
It's a wild conclusion.
It really is. The orphans wash up on a remote island, and the reader explicitly, profoundly connects the themes of this island to their own lived experience in a highly sheltered, dogmatic household.
The island presents the illusion of a perfect static utopia. Yes. The island is run by a facilitator, a benefactor, named Ishmael. And he keeps the island safe by using intense peer pressure, fostering a total echo chamber, and demanding the complete sacrifice of individuality.
It's a cult.
Basically. Whenever anything washes ashore that might cause conflict or spark curiosity, like a book or an invention or a weapon, Ishmael forces the islanders to throw it into a subterranean space on the other side of the island. He even drugs them with a cordial to keep them complacent and forgetful.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the walled garden we saw in Parable of the Sower, but taken to its psychological extreme.
And the reader zeroes in on that subterranean space. The orphans discover it, and they find it filled with castaway items, including journals written by their own parents.
A literal vault of history.
Yeah. It feels like a return to the safety of the parents they never really knew. It's safe. It's isolated. The world can't hurt them down there. But ultimately, when given the choice to stay on the safe, stagnant island or leave, the orphans choose to leave. They load up a boat and choose the dangerous, unpredictable, violent ocean over the safe, drugged echo chamber.
The psychological underpinnings of this choice are massive for the reader. They reference Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces and, more importantly, Maureen Murdoch's The Heroine's Journey.
Most people know Campbell's monomyth, The Hero's Journey. A protagonist leaves home, faces trials, achieves a victory, and returns changed. Luke Skywalker, Frodo Baggins. But what is Murdoch's framework?
Maureen Murdoch was a student of Campbell who felt his model didn't adequately address the psychological realities of women or anyone healing from a deeply internalized patriarchal or authoritarian system.
That makes sense.
Murdoch's framework isn't about conquering an external monster. It's an internal journey. It explores how mythological structures can be used for trauma processing, imagery therapy, and finding an authentic selfhood by healing the split between the mind and the body.
So it's not about slaying the dragon. It's about realizing you don't have to live in the dragon's cave anymore.
Exactly. The Baudelaires completing their journey, choosing to leave the island, rejecting the false benefactor, and facing the unknown ocean, is a literal narrative manifestation of the psychological trauma processing the reader is actively undergoing. They are choosing the pain of reality over the comfort of the echo chamber.
It's the ultimate coming of age. But the reader pulls in one final mind-bending piece of nonfiction here that I almost couldn't believe.
What was it?
They read Eliezer Yudkowsky and Nate Soer's essay, If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies, alongside Isaac Asimov's classic I, Robot.
Wow. A sudden pivot to the existential risk of artificial intelligence.
Right. The essay is a stark warning about the alignment problem, the terrifying difficulty of making sure a superintelligent AI's goals perfectly align with human survival. If you give an AI the goal to cure cancer without aligning it with human ethics, it might decide the easiest way to cure cancer is to instantly vaporize all humans.
It is a brilliant, entirely unexpected synthesis by the reader. They realize that the AI alignment problem is actually the ultimate species-wide metaphor for the creator's dilemma, and fundamentally, it is the exact same dynamic as parenting.
Let's let that breathe for a second because it is profound. Creating a supercomputer without guidelines is identical to abandoning an intelligent child.
Humans creating an artificial intelligence that might extinguish them because they failed to guide it, nurture it, or instill it with empathy is the ultimate apocalyptic parallel to incompetent adults failing their children.
Wow.
It is Victor Frankenstein and his monster. If the creator is negligent, the creation becomes a threat.
The reader realizes that an unthinking reliance on a benefactor, whether it's Ishmael on the island, the totalitarian state in Zamyatin's We, or a superintelligent AI, will inevitably lead to extinction. True safety doesn't come from outsourcing your protection to a higher power.
You can't just trust the system.
No. You can't just trust the system to raise the child or trust the corporation to code the AI. It requires immense, proactive, individual responsibility. If you abdicate your agency to the adults in the room, you die.
Agency is the only thing that provides the identity we need to grow into functioning adults. And the reader highlights the tragedy of lacking this agency by bringing up David Lawson's biography of Paul Morphy.
Paul Morphy, the 19th century American chess prodigy.
Yes. Morphy had arguably one of the most brilliant analytical minds of his century. He conquered the chess world effortlessly, but fame, the pressures of his era, and the outbreak of the American Civil War completely destroyed him. He descended into severe paranoia and delusion.
That's heartbreaking.
The reader points out that Morphy lacked a supportive, understanding community, and he lacked the personal agency to navigate his own life outside the strict rules of the chessboard. Without agency, even unparalleled brilliance is a tragedy.
And that leads directly to the reader's final reflection on their 2-year journey. It is incredibly moving. They wrote that while all their peers were growing up immersed in the comforting magic of Harry Potter, or the clear, binary heroism of Star Wars, they realize now, at 30 years old, they would have been far better off with the Baudelaires.
A profound, hard-won realization of what their specific psyche actually required.
They wrote that reading alongside Klaus in the library, inventing mechanical devices with Violet, and cooking meals with Sunny would have provided a much fuller, much more resilient sense of self. It wouldn't have promised them a magic wand to fix their problems, but it would have taught them how to exist, how to maintain their identity and their sanity, despite the totally incompetent adults surrounding them.
It becomes clear that this wasn't just a reading list for this person. It was a painstakingly curated, intellectually rigorous roadmap for psychological reconstruction.
Exactly. by combining the bleak systemic analysis of Kafka's corrupted courts and the historical reality of civilizational collapses from the Bronze Age.
With the applied empirical optimism of hard sci-fi protagonists surviving on Mars, the philosophical weight of the AI alignment problem, and the cynical yet deeply empathetic whimsy of Lemony Snicket.
This reader literally engineered their own self-actualization. They built a raft out of 50 books to sail away from their own isolated island.
I would encourage you, the listener, to consider your own media diet this week. Think about the seemingly disparate deep dives you listen to, the historical articles you skim, or the fiction you consume before bed.
Yeah.
Consider how they might be secretly talking to each other in your subconscious. What underlying anxieties are they addressing? How are they helping you process the unresolved narratives of your own past?
That's the real magic trick of reading, isn't it? We read to know we aren't alone, even if the people keeping us company are fictional orphans. Which leaves me with a final challenge for you.
Oh, I love a good challenge.
If you were to apply the critical, uncompromising lens of Lemony Snicket to the adult systems in your life right now, your workplace, your local government, your community organizations, what fires would you suddenly realize no one is actually coming to put out?
And more importantly, how quickly would you start inventing your own way out of the building?
A question that should probably change how you view your world tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep journey through the stacks. Keep reading, keep questioning the adults in the room, and we'll see you next time.